Okay, so this is, you know what, I just realized that I always say, okay, so you probably noticed that in the past few videos. Anyway, this is the last video discussing rhythm in poetry, and this time we're going to look at an example, continuing on from the lines of poetry that we looked at in the third video. So, what have we covered so far? We've covered meter, which is the way to describe or measure rhythm in poetry. We've covered the basic units of rhythm, that is the syllables and the two types that make up rhythm, stressed and unstressed. And we've also looked at feet, which are the basic building blocks of rhythm. And we've discussed some of the vocab that can be quite complex, but that you just have to train yourself to get used to. So who cares? Why should we care? It might have been confusing, but mastering these terms and applying them requires some practice, and it's really going to be key if you're going to be scoring high on your analysis of poetry. Now, I've just talked about the purposes of rhythm in the first video, so you can always go and check that out again. What we're going to see now is all of this in action. So one poet playing with rhythm in particular, and how that adds a layer of meaning on top of the language that's being used in a poem. So we're going to go back to Burning Sappho, which is a really famous poem by Gwen, Harwood, one of the most famous Australian poets out there. Now, this is the first stanza. Remember, a stanza is like a verse in a song, except a stanza indicates kind of like the verse of, or one verse of a poem. So it sounds like this, and you should listen to this carefully, because you might pick up how the rhythm changes and how it's interrupted, and how it actually affects the meaning of the poem. Okay. The clothes are washed, the house is clean. I find my pen and start to write. Something like hatred fought between my child and me. She kicks her good new well-selected toys with spite around the room and whines for food. Okay. I'm going to read it again. Pay attention to the punctuation. The clothes are washed, the house is clean. I find my pen and start to write. Something like hatred forks between my child and me. She kicks her good new well-selected toys with spite around the room and whines for food. Now I'm going to do it one last time, but really slow, so you can hear the unstressed and stressed syllables, the iambs. The clothes are washed, the house is clean. I find my pen and start to write. Something like hatred forks between my child and me. She kicks her good, new, well-selected toys with spite around the room and whines for food. Could have done that better, but you get the point. It's got this da-dum, 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 da-dum. Okay, there's a very consistent rhythm in there. Iambic tetrameter, 4 feet, each made up of iambs. But if you look at the punctuation, it actually affects the consistency of the rhythm in the poem. So, the first two lines are perfectly consistent with each other, and they all end on the end of the line. Each sentence ends at the end of the line, creating a sense of completeness. The rhythm is also consistent as a result. But then let's look at the third and fourth line. The next sentence begins in the third line and ends abruptly in the middle of the fourth line, so there's a break in consistency there. The first two lines have a consistent rhythm and consistently end at the same point. But the next one, in the third and fourth line, ends in the middle of the fourth line. This causes a pause in the rhythm of the poem. So again, the clothes are washed, the house is clean. I find my pen and start to write. Something like hatred forks between my child and me. So there's a pause, there's a break in the middle of the line, in the middle of the consistent rhythm. And then at the end, from the second half of the fourth line to the sixth line, we have a very long sentence about the annoying behavior of the child. Could it maybe indicate the exasperation of the speaker? Okay, you know when you kind of rant about something, you're a bit exasperated or a bit fed up with something, you rant about it and it's a very long sentence? That's kind of the feel here. This is how the poet has played with the rhythm by using punctuation. So, knowing the rhythm so far is quite helpful. We know that it's consistent, iambic tetrameter. The pause in the middle of the fourth line is an interruption of the previously consistent rhythm. There's a break in consistency, there's an interruption in consistency. And what's going on here, if you consider the language and the action of the poem, is that it emphasizes or lets us hear how the child has interrupted the speaker's writing, which is obviously extremely frustrating because she goes on kind of a long rant in the next 2.5 lines. She describes this as the feeling of it as something like hatred. So note it's not hatred itself, it's something like hatred. And it paints a negative image of the child through the words spite and whines. So kind of an annoying child. The pause in the rhythm helps the audience to hear the interruption of the speaker, and feel the same sense of irritation. Because when we listen to this, we can hear the interruption, and we're aware of the interruption and how it interrupts this perfectly consistent line. So one last time. The clothes are washed, the house is clean. I find my pen and start to write. Something like hatred forks between my child and me. She kicks her good, new well-selected toys with spite around the room and whines for food. So, this is an example, a somewhat complex one, but I find a really useful one because it shows how rhythm can be interrupted and how rhythm can play a part in constructing meaning in a poem. Hopefully this is helpful for you, especially for you who are studying Burning Sappho. It's just kind of as like a study tool, I suppose. Hopefully you've enjoyed these 4 videos that you've watched, or at least skimmed through, or at least gone through in your own time. I really hope that it's helped you to get a better grasp of rhythm in poetry. So now you are a bit more prepared to actually discuss it in your own analysis. End.